The phone rang at exactly 3:17 p.m. on a Sunday. It was the kind of phone call nobody wants to receive, the kind that shatters your world in a single sentence. "It's Robert Reiner. They're gone." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, thick, suffocating, and impossible to ignore. In an instant, the glamorous veneer of Hollywood wealth and celebrity disappeared, replaced with a nightmare no one could have imagined. How could this happen? To a family everyone thought untouchable? And most chillingly of all, could the son, the youngest of the Reiner dynasty, really be involved? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. The Reiners weren't just any Hollywood family. Robert Reiner was a legend, a filmmaker whose name alone could light up a marquee. His wife, Miranda Reiner, was a celebrated photographer and producer, known in elite circles for her impeccable taste and ironclad influence. Their lives were documented in glossy magazines, from red carpet appearances to high-profile philanthropy. But behind the perfectly curated Instagram shots and gala appearances, something darker was brewing, something no one saw coming. Sunday afternoon in Brentwood was serene, almost painfully normal. The sun cast long shadows over the manicured lawns of multi-million-dollar estates. Birds chirped in the eucalyptus trees, children played on nearby streets, and neighbors went about their usual weekend routines. And yet, inside the Reiner mansion, a horror was unfolding that would soon grip the entire nation. The bodies of Robert and Miranda were discovered in their home, victims of a brutal stabbing, their lives extinguished in a violent, unthinkable act. The police arrived within minutes, but the scene offered no immediate answers, only questions. Who would do this? Why? And, most disturbingly, could it have been someone who was supposed to love them most? As news of the tragedy leaked, social media erupted. The hashtag Reiner family tragedy began trending almost immediately. Fans and colleagues posted shocked condolences, some expressing disbelief, others anger. How could such a powerful family, seemingly untouchable, fall victim to a crime so intimate, so personal? Reporters descended on Brentwood, cameras flashing, microphones shoved into the faces of stunned neighbors. But all anyone could say was, "We never saw this coming." And maybe that was the point. In families like the Reiners, the cracks often run invisible until they shatter entirely. The youngest Reiner son, Nathan, 32, had always been the wild card. Unlike his older siblings, who followed in the footsteps of their parents with careful precision, Nathan had a reputation for unpredictability. From a young age, he had been both brilliant and reckless, a charm that drew people in and a volatility that pushed them away. He'd attended the finest schools, traveled the world, and yet somehow, he never seemed to settle, never seemed to fit into the polished image his parents cultivated. Some whispered that he resented the weight of his family name, that the shadow of Robert Reiner's towering legacy suffocated him. Others believed it was just youthful rebellion, the kind that eventually fades with time. But when the police identified Nathan as the person of interest, whispers turned into gasps, then screams of disbelief. The son who should have been mourning the death of his parents was now at the center of the storm. Investigators from the Los Angeles Police Department moved quickly. Within hours of discovering the Reiners' bodies, evidence began to surface pointing toward Nathan. Security footage, forensic traces, and witness accounts started to align in a way that was both chilling and precise. How had he managed to evade suspicion until that point? Was this a crime of passion, a premeditated act, or something in between? And if Nathan was guilty, what could have driven him to commit such a horrific act against his own family? The questions were endless, and each answer seemed to only deepen the mystery. But the story didn't stop there. As investigators dug deeper, a portrait of a family fraught with tension and secrecy began to emerge. Behind the smiling photographs, behind the glamorous parties and charitable donations, there were conflicts, resentments, and old wounds. Nathan had not always been the troubled outlier. He had been a son full of promise, a young man with a future in filmmaking, much like his father. But something had shifted over time. Friends reported arguments over money, inheritance, and creative differences. Some spoke of late-night confrontations that ended in shouting matches, of doors slammed and threats whispered in anger. Had anyone truly understood Nathan? Or had the pressures of fame and expectation built a pressure cooker ready to explode? Meanwhile, media outlets raced to cover every detail, real or rumored. Every social media post, every public appearance, every cryptic message online became fodder for speculation. Was Nathan hiding something on his phone? Did he leave a note? What about his relationships, friends, ex-lovers, colleagues? Did they hold clues? Audiences watched, horrified yet captivated, unable to turn away from a story that felt part crime drama, part family tragedy, and part psychological thriller. The line between reality and narrative blurred. This wasn't just a murder case. It was a story about power, legacy, and the dark side of fame. The questions only multiplied when Nathan was finally apprehended. He was taken into custody without incident, but the world already had its verdict in mind. People speculated endlessly: cold-blooded killer, misunderstood genius, tragic victim of circumstance. Each theory seemed plausible, yet none fully explained the horror of the crime. And as prosecutors prepared to present their case, as lawyers examined every possible angle, one thing became clear: this story was far from over. The details that would emerge in court, the revelations that would surface about family dynamics, hidden motives, and shocking secrets, were guaranteed to stun even the most jaded observers. But what was perhaps most unsettling of all was the realization that this could happen anywhere. A family that appeared perfect, untouchable, and glamorous could harbor darkness so deep that no one outside could comprehend it. In that moment, viewers and readers alike had to confront a terrifying truth. Sometimes, the greatest dangers come not from strangers, but from those we love most. And as the investigation continued, as the media frenzy intensified, and as the courtroom drama loomed, everyone would have to ask themselves, how well do we really know the people closest to us? How well did Robert and Miranda know their own son? And more importantly, what happened on that fateful Sunday afternoon that would forever change the Reiner legacy? As the sun set over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the palm-lined streets, the Reiner mansion sat silent and foreboding. Lights flickered in the neighboring homes, unaware of the drama unfolding just a few doors down. Investigators continued their painstaking work, combing through evidence, interviewing witnesses, and building a timeline that was as chilling as it was meticulous. Every discovery seemed to lead to another layer of complexity, another revelation that left everyone questioning what they thought they knew. And in that silence, one question echoed louder than all the rest. Could this truly have been the act of a son, or was there something even darker at play? A secret that would shock the world when finally revealed? The Reiner tragedy had only just begun to unfold. The world watched with bated breath, hungry for answers, desperate for closure, yet dreading the truth that might come. And as the first whispers of the courtroom battle reached the public, one fact remained undeniable. This was not just a story of murder. It was a story of family, betrayal, power, and the unbearable weight of legacy. Every revelation, every twist, every shocking detail would leave viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about the people behind the Hollywood facade. And just when you think you've pieced it together, just when you think the truth is within reach, the story would take a turn no one saw coming. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday afternoon. Brentwood, with its manicured lawns, leafy streets, and multi-million-dollar estates, looked like a postcard for luxury living. But inside the Reiner mansion, a scene was unfolding that no one could have imagined. When the first neighbor noticed the unusual silence, no barking dog, no sound of music, no laughter from the yard, they grew uneasy. They had known the Reiners for years, admired the family's sophistication, and yet, something about that stillness felt wrong. By the time the 911 call came in, the horror had already taken hold. Officers arrived at the mansion to find a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. Robert Reiner, Hollywood icon, 78, and his wife Miranda, 70, were found in their home, victims of a brutal stabbing. The details were grim. Blood spattered across the walls. Furniture was overturned. And at the center of it all, the bodies of two people who had once seemed untouchable lay lifeless, a violent contrast to the glamour and perfection they projected to the world. From the very first moments, investigators knew this case would not be ordinary. It wasn't just the sheer violence or the shock of the victim's prominence. It was the sense that someone very close had to be involved. In high-profile crimes, the perpetrator is often someone familiar, someone with access and knowledge, someone who knows the layout of the house, the routines, the habits of the victims. And as the LAPD scoured the mansion for clues, one name began to emerge. Nathan Reiner, the youngest son. Nathan was not a stranger to controversy. Friends described him as brilliant, volatile, charming, and unpredictable, a mix that made him both magnetic and dangerous. He had a history of rebellion, of breaking norms, and of testing boundaries. Some said it was the weight of the Reiner name that burdened him, a shadow too long and too bright for him to step out of. Others whispered darker stories, though no one ever spoke openly about them. But as the evidence mounted, whispers began to coalesce into something far more tangible, far more terrifying. Security cameras in the neighborhood and around the mansion showed Nathan in the vicinity that day, moving in ways that, at first, seemed innocuous. But when investigators cross-referenced timelines with phone records, they discovered something chilling. Nathan's movements coincided almost exactly with the window during which the murders were believed to have occurred. Was this merely coincidence, or something more sinister? And if Nathan had been involved, how could someone who grew up in that house, who had known every corner, every secret passage, every daily ritual, commit such a crime? For the public, the revelation that the son was the primary suspect was unthinkable. Social media erupted. Fans and followers, who had once idolized the Reiners, now questioned everything they thought they knew. The idea that the youngest Reiner could be implicated in the deaths of his parents felt almost too shocking to process. Headlines screamed, "Hollywood dynasty shattered, son arrested in parent murders, family tragedy in Brentwood." The news cycles ran 24/7, each outlet trying to outdo the other in speculation and analysis. But beyond the media frenzy, there was the psychological question that gripped everyone who knew Nathan. How could a son turn on his parents? Was it premeditated? A crime of passion? Or something more complex, something that no one could have predicted? Psychologists and criminal behavior experts weighed in, offering theories that ranged from financial motives to deep-seated resentment to untreated mental health issues. Each theory, though plausible, left unanswered questions. What had pushed Nathan over the edge? And had anyone seen the warning signs? Meanwhile, the investigation itself revealed unsettling details about the Reiner family dynamics. Friends, colleagues, and neighbors described a household that, on the surface, seemed perfect, cultured, successful, influential. But behind closed doors, tensions simmered. Nathan had been known to clash with his father over creative projects, inheritance discussions, and lifestyle choices. Miranda, known for her composure and elegance, had reportedly tried to mediate disputes, but even her efforts seemed unable to bridge the growing chasm between father and son. Some sources claimed that Robert Reiner, despite his fame and achievements, had a temper that could flare unpredictably. While he was a visionary filmmaker adored by millions, in private, he could be controlling, critical, and unyielding. Nathan, who shared his father's intelligence and drive, reportedly chafed under the constant scrutiny and pressure. It was a classic case of rebellion against authority, but in this story, rebellion escalated into something unthinkable. On the night of the murders, forensic evidence began to tell a story that was both meticulous and terrifying. Blood spatter patterns, fingerprints, and a careful reconstruction of the timeline pointed towards someone with intimate knowledge of the house. Investigators discovered signs of forced entry in some areas, but also points where doors had been unlocked, a detail suggesting the perpetrator might have had easy access. Every piece of evidence seemed to point towards someone who was both familiar and comfortable with the space, someone who knew the Reiners inside and out. Even as the police worked to piece together the details, Nathan's name became the focal point. He was located hours later, calmly walking through a park near a prominent university campus. There was no chase, no violent confrontation. He was arrested without incident, his hands cuffed, his face unreadable. Witnesses described a chilling calmness, as if Nathan was aware of the world's gaze upon him and welcomed it, or perhaps as if he had resigned himself to the inevitable consequences. Public reaction was a mix of disbelief, horror, and morbid fascination. How could a Hollywood family, so celebrated and envied, be brought down by one of its own? Commentators speculated endlessly about motive, opportunity, and the psychology of privilege. People asked themselves whether fame and wealth had warped Nathan's perception of morality or entitlement. Others wondered whether underlying mental health struggles, unaddressed and ignored, had played a role. And yet, even with Nathan in custody, the story was far from over. The question of motive lingered like a dark cloud. Financial records, private messages, and personal journals, all items now under scrutiny, hinted at layers of resentment, conflict, and potential triggers. Investigators were meticulous, knowing that in cases involving high-profile families, the public and media would not tolerate mistakes. Every detail mattered, from the smallest discrepancy in a timeline to the tiniest fingerprint. Each discovery was analyzed and reanalyzed, building a picture that was both complex and horrifying. By the end of Chapter 1, one truth was unavoidable: this was more than a crime. It was a psychological puzzle, a family drama escalated to unimaginable levels, and a story that would reveal dark truths about love, loyalty, and betrayal. Viewers and readers were left with questions that had no easy answers. Could Nathan really be guilty? Was there something hidden beneath the surface, a secret that would shock the world once revealed? And perhaps most hauntingly, could any family, no matter how seemingly perfect, truly be safe from the darkness that sometimes lurks closest to home? But just as investigators thought they were beginning to understand the sequence of events, a new piece of evidence emerged, one that would upend everything they thought they knew. It was small, almost innocuous at first glance, but it hinted at a truth far more complicated than a simple act of violence. And in that moment, everyone realized that what they were dealing with was no ordinary murder case. It was a labyrinth of secrets, lies, and family betrayal that would leave the world questioning everything about the Reiners. What was this new evidence? Who would it implicate? And how could it possibly rewrite the narrative of that fateful Sunday? The answers would not come easily, and what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The morning after the murders, Los Angeles woke to a story that seemed ripped from a dark Hollywood script. Coffee cups trembled in hand as people scrolled their phones. The Reiner family tragedy had not only shocked the city, but sent ripples across the nation. Headlines screamed accusations and theories, but behind the chaos was a simple, terrifying truth. Nathan Reiner, the youngest son, was now the focal point of the investigation. The son everyone thought they knew. The charming, rebellious, enigmatic Nathan had become the suspect in a crime that would dominate news cycles for weeks, months, possibly years. But who was Nathan, really? On the surface, he was the quintessential Hollywood heir, good-looking, educated, witty, and social. He had grown up with the privileges of wealth and fame, attending private schools and elite universities. He traveled the world, hobnobbing with celebrities and industry leaders. In public, he appeared confident, even carefree. In private, however, things were more complicated. Those who knew him well described a man at once brilliant and unpredictable, someone who alternated between charm and volatility with unnerving ease. Nathan's early life hinted at both promise and instability. Unlike his older siblings, who followed a clear path within the family's orbit of influence, Nathan often sought his own way, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. He dabbled in filmmaking, music, and entrepreneurial ventures, but none seemed to fully satisfy him. Friends whispered about temper tantrums, sudden disappearances, and erratic behavior. Teachers recalled both his extraordinary intellect and his propensity for rebellion. At first, these were shrugged off as youthful quirks, the eccentricities of someone destined for greatness. But in hindsight, they painted a picture of someone under immense pressure, someone grappling with expectations too heavy to bear. Social circles knew Nathan as magnetic. He could light up a room, command attention, and charm strangers with the ease of someone accustomed to power. Yet behind closed doors, those same circles admitted there were fractures. Arguments with family members, disagreements over money, and creative conflicts had become increasingly common in recent years. Nathan resented the Reiner legacy even as he lived in its shadow. He wanted independence, recognition, and freedom from the weight of his family name. And that tension, simmering for decades, would soon explode in a way no one could have predicted. When investigators began examining Nathan's life in detail, a troubling mosaic emerged. Financial statements revealed unexplained withdrawals and transfers. Private correspondence suggested simmering resentments and unresolved conflicts. Friends and acquaintances recalled cryptic social media posts that now seemed eerily prescient, almost as if Nathan had been signaling the world about his inner turmoil. Every detail was scrutinized, every contradiction dissected, and yet the full picture remained elusive. Was Nathan a premeditated murderer, a tragic figure pushed too far, or something in between? The question of motive became central. Investigators considered all possibilities: financial gain, jealousy, unresolved disputes, or perhaps a mental health crisis. Nathan had a documented history of emotional volatility, and experts suggested that a combination of pressure, resentment, and opportunity could have created a perfect storm. But motive alone wasn't enough. Investigators needed evidence, concrete, undeniable proof that linked Nathan to the crime. And as they dug deeper, the first shocking revelations began to surface. Nathan's interactions on the day of the murders were particularly telling. Witnesses reported seeing him near the mansion at unusual times, moving in ways that suggested familiarity and intent. His phone records placed him in critical locations during windows of time that coincided with the estimated moment of the murders. Security footage, initially dismissed as inconclusive, revealed subtle patterns. Gestures, pauses, and movements that suggested knowledge of the home's layout and the family's routines. The implications were chilling. If Nathan had been present at the scene, it was not a random act. He knew precisely where to go, what to do, and when. As the investigation intensified, public fascination reached fever pitch. Social media, cable news, and online forums dissected every detail of Nathan's life. Amateur psychologists debated his possible motivations. True crime enthusiasts speculated on timelines and potential accomplices. Friends and acquaintances were interviewed repeatedly, their every word scrutinized for hidden meanings. The court of public opinion had convened, and Nathan was already on trial in the eyes of millions, long before a judge or jury would weigh the facts. But even with all this scrutiny, Nathan remained an enigma. In interviews conducted through his legal representatives, he offered little more than terse statements. His demeanor alternated between calm detachment and fleeting flashes of emotion, leaving observers unsure whether they were witnessing guilt, grief, or calculated restraint. Some legal experts suggested this could be a strategic move, keeping public appearances controlled while preparing for a high-stakes trial. Others speculated that his composure was unsettling, hinting at a mind capable of compartmentalizing and calculating in ways most could not comprehend. Meanwhile, the Reiner family's legacy loomed over every discussion. Robert Reiner's cinematic achievements, Miranda's artistic influence, and the family's wealth and connections created an aura of invincibility, one that had been shattered almost overnight. The murders were not just a personal tragedy. They were a public spectacle, a headline-grabbing story that highlighted the fragility beneath the veneer of celebrity. How could a family so admired, so powerful, be undone by a son? And what did it say about the pressures and dynamics within Hollywood dynasties? Friends and colleagues of Nathan began to reveal more details about his personality and behavior in recent years. Some spoke of increased isolation, a tendency to avoid family gatherings, and growing frustration with his father's expectations. Others mentioned financial disputes, creative disagreements, and moments of emotional volatility that had, in retrospect, seemed ominous. While none suggested he was capable of murder, the cumulative picture painted a man struggling under enormous pressure, someone whose private struggles had gone largely unnoticed by the outside world. The media capitalized on every nuance. Headlines emphasized conflict, secrecy, and betrayal. Cable news commentators speculated about a dramatic showdown in the Reiner household. Social media users crafted elaborate theories, complete with timelines, diagrams, and psychological profiles. The story became a phenomenon, a mix of horror, fascination, and curiosity that gripped audiences across the globe. And at the center of it all was Nathan, the son no one expected, whose actions, motives, and inner life remained shrouded in mystery. As Chapter 2 draws to a close, one fact becomes impossible to ignore. Nathan's life, personality, and history were now under a microscope, and each revelation brought new questions. What had truly motivated him? Had there been warning signs that went unnoticed? Was there more to this story than a simple act of violence? Something buried in the family's past? Something that might finally explain the unthinkable? And then came the discovery that would turn everything upside down. A hidden message, a secret connection, a clue that no one had anticipated. It was small, almost invisible, yet it hinted at a truth far more shocking than anyone had imagined. A revelation that would force investigators, the public, and even Nathan himself to confront a reality that was darker, stranger, and more dangerous than anyone could have predicted. What was the hidden clue? Who did it implicate? And how would it redefine the narrative of the Reiner tragedy? The Reiner mansion had always been a place of contradictions. To outsiders, it was the epitome of Hollywood glamour. Sleek modern architecture, art-filled halls, and rooms bathed in sunlight that highlighted perfectly curated furniture and decor. Yet beneath that elegance, investigators began to uncover a different story, one of tension, hidden resentments, and secrets so carefully guarded that even close friends and extended family had no idea they existed. From the earliest interviews, detectives noticed a pattern. Neighbors, friends, and employees all described a household that was outwardly flawless but inwardly volatile. There were whispers of arguments that erupted without warning, of late-night confrontations that left the walls echoing with shouting. Miranda Reiner, despite her composed public image, had been forced to act as mediator between her husband and youngest son more times than anyone realized. Robert Reiner, whose creative genius had earned him worldwide acclaim, could be exacting, controlling, and deeply critical, traits that some said Nathan absorbed and mirrored in troubling ways. The first piece of evidence to paint this picture came from a series of journals discovered in a hidden drawer in Nathan's study. The entries were fragmented, at times almost incoherent, blending musings about creative aspirations with expressions of frustration, anger, and isolation. Some pages described arguments with his father over career paths and life choices. Others hinted at financial grievances, money spent recklessly, inheritance disputes, and a sense of being overshadowed by his older siblings. Most chilling were passages that suggested Nathan had been brooding over feelings of betrayal and inadequacy for years, a simmering tension that might have been invisible to the outside world but was palpable on the page. Forensic psychologists pored over the journals, attempting to understand Nathan's state of mind. They noted patterns of obsessive thought, a heightened sensitivity to criticism, and an underlying resentment toward his parents that had been building for decades. This was not merely teenage rebellion or youthful defiance. It was a deeply entrenched psychological struggle, one that, in some interpretations, could have escalated into the catastrophic events of that Sunday. Experts emphasized that while these entries did not prove guilt, they offered context, a window into a mind under pressure, a young man struggling with identity, expectation, and suppressed rage. Investigators also focused on the layout of the mansion itself. While the home was modern and luxurious, it was also labyrinthine, with multiple wings, hidden nooks, and private corridors. Robert and Miranda had installed a series of security measures over the years. Cameras, alarms, and locked doors that had always offered a sense of safety. Yet these same features revealed unsettling details in the investigation. There were signs that someone with intimate knowledge of the house could navigate it without triggering alarms, someone who knew the patterns of daily life so well that their movements could appear almost invisible. This only reinforced the growing suspicion that Nathan, familiar with every corner of the mansion, was uniquely positioned to carry out the crime. But the story wasn't just about architecture or physical evidence. Interviews with close family friends painted a vivid, and often contradictory, picture of Nathan's relationships. Some described him as affectionate, capable of surprising acts of kindness and charm. Others recalled moments of cruelty, manipulation, or sudden anger. One family friend, speaking on the condition of anonymity, described an argument over a film project that had escalated to the point where Nathan threatened to sever ties with the family entirely. He wasn't always like this, the friend said. But there was something in him, a storm brewing. You could feel it in the air. The investigation also uncovered a network of communications that raised further questions. Text messages, emails, and private social media interactions revealed conflicts with friends and acquaintances, as well as cryptic messages hinting at emotional distress. Some messages suggested Nathan felt trapped by expectations, burdened by the Reiner legacy, and desperate for independence. Others were darker, reflecting anger, paranoia, and possible planning. Each message was dissected, time-stamped, and analyzed, offering a digital trail that hinted at both motive and opportunity. Yet, even with all this evidence, inconsistencies remained. There were gaps in the timeline that no one could explain, moments where Nathan's whereabouts were uncertain, and questions about whether someone else might have been involved, either knowingly or unknowingly. Investigators had to confront a chilling possibility. This was not a straightforward case. Every assumption about motive, method, and opportunity could be challenged, and each revelation seemed to deepen the mystery rather than simplify it. The media, meanwhile, seized on every nuance. Cable news segments focused on Nathan's upbringing, the pressures of fame, and the psychological profile emerging from investigators' reports. Social media exploded with speculation, theories, and sometimes outright conspiracy. Was this premeditated? People asked. Was Nathan planning something for years? The public, drawn to the allure of scandal and family tragedy, devoured every detail. Analysts compared the Reiner family to historical dynasties whose internal conflicts had led to public catastrophes. The story became more than a murder investigation. It was a cultural fascination, a reflection on wealth, privilege, and the invisible pressures that shape human behavior. In the midst of all this, one particularly revealing interview came from a longtime family assistant. She had worked for the Reiners for more than a decade and described a household divided into spheres of influence. Robert dominated the creative and professional aspects of family life. Miranda maintained social and philanthropic control. Nathan, caught between admiration for his father and resentment over perceived limitations, often found himself isolated. She recalled evenings when Nathan would retreat to his private study, shut the door, and emerge hours later with intense focus, sometimes jittery, sometimes withdrawn. The assistant admitted she never imagined these behaviors could lead to violence, but in retrospect, they painted a troubling portrait of escalating emotional strain. Another discovery added layers of complexity, hidden disputes over finances and inheritance. Legal documents showed that Robert and Miranda had structured their estate in ways that some family members viewed as inequitable. Nathan, according to private notes and emails, expressed frustration over these arrangements, feeling constrained and powerless. This financial tension, combined with long-standing emotional conflicts, provided a potential motive that investigators could not ignore. As Chapter 3 neared its end, the investigation began to point toward a new and unsettling realization. The Reiner family's public perfection had been a carefully maintained facade, concealing years of unresolved tension and hidden conflicts. Nathan's life, once perceived as privileged and charmed, was in fact fraught with pressure, expectation, and resentment. Every diary entry, every message, every argument offered a small piece of a larger puzzle. A puzzle that hinted at a truth far more complicated than a single act of violence. And then came the final discovery that would shock even seasoned investigators. A hidden room in the mansion, previously unknown to anyone outside the family, containing artifacts, notes, and recordings that suggested the Reiners had secrets far beyond what anyone had imagined. These items hinted at unresolved conflicts, family strategies, and perhaps even premeditated intentions that blurred the line between victim and perpetrator. The questions multiplied. What exactly was in that room? Who had access to it? And how would its contents change the investigation, the public perception, and Nathan's fate? The answers were coming. And when they emerged, they would upend everything the world thought it knew about the Reiners. But what was inside that hidden room? And who would discover the truth first? The stage was set for revelations that would shake Hollywood to its core. No one could have predicted that the Reiner mansion, a symbol of Hollywood luxury and prestige, would hold a secret so shocking it threatened to rewrite the narrative of the entire tragedy. The hidden room was discovered by a forensic investigator, almost by accident, during a meticulous sweep of the house. A panel behind a bookshelf, nearly invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the mansion, swung open with a soft click, revealing a space that was both intimate and unnerving. Inside, the room was lined with shelves and cabinets, each containing artifacts that ranged from personal diaries to voice recordings, old photographs, and files that hinted at long-buried family disputes. It was as if the room itself had been a vault for the Reiners' private lives. A place where they stored not just memories, but secrets, fears, and truths they never wanted the outside world to see. Investigators quickly realized that the contents of this room could change everything, offering insight into family dynamics, personal grievances, and perhaps even motivations that had been invisible until that moment. The first item that drew attention was a stack of personal journals belonging to Miranda Reiner. Unlike the diaries Nathan had kept, Miranda's entries were composed, reflective, and at times, piercingly honest. They detailed her frustrations with Robert's controlling tendencies, her own fears for the children, and her growing concern over Nathan's increasingly unpredictable behavior. One passage, in particular, stood out. "I fear for Nathan. He is brilliant, yes, but there is a storm in him that I cannot calm. I worry that if something doesn't change, he may spiral beyond control." The words sent chills through the investigators. Could Miranda have sensed the tragedy that would unfold? Was this a warning that no one heeded? Next were folders containing old legal documents and correspondence that revealed a web of disputes over inheritance, creative rights, and financial control. Robert had been meticulous in planning the family's estate, but these records suggested that Nathan had been increasingly frustrated, believing that the arrangements were unfair and that his opportunities were being restricted. Emails between Nathan and close friends, some dating back months, contained veiled references to feeling trapped and overlooked, hints of simmering resentment that investigators now had to take seriously. Perhaps most disturbing were the audio recordings. Hidden in a locked cabinet were tapes of private conversations, some between family members, and others seemingly monologues Nathan had recorded in moments of emotional intensity. In these recordings, Nathan's voice alternated between reflective, angry, and almost pleading. He spoke of feelings of inadequacy, of being overshadowed, and of his desire to assert control over his own life. But there were also darker undertones. Passages where he questioned loyalty, trust, and the very nature of family bonds. Investigators played these recordings repeatedly, each time finding new nuances that deepened the mystery and heightened concern about his state of mind. As the team sifted through the hidden room's contents, patterns began to emerge. The room itself had clearly been curated over years, a private archive where the family documented not only achievements but conflicts, fears, and secrets. It revealed the complexity of the Reiner family dynamic, a mix of love, rivalry, control, and resentment. And within that complexity, Nathan's presence loomed large. The materials suggested a young man struggling with identity, expectation, and emotion, someone whose inner world had become increasingly difficult to navigate. But the room also held surprises that no one expected. Among the photographs and letters were notes referencing third parties, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances whose involvement in the family's private matters had never been known publicly. Some of these notes hinted at relationships fraught with tension and mistrust. Others suggested alliances or secret communications that may have influenced the unfolding events. Each discovery raised new questions. Could someone outside the immediate family have played a role, knowingly or unknowingly? And if so, what had they contributed to the eventual tragedy? As forensic teams cataloged each item, investigators were forced to reconsider their assumptions. The case, once believed to hinge solely on Nathan's potential motives and actions, now appeared far more intricate. The hidden room suggested that multiple layers of secrecy, conflict, and hidden knowledge had existed within the Reiner household for years. Every detail, no matter how small, became a potential clue. A thread that, if followed, could unravel a larger story of betrayal, tension, and tragedy. Meanwhile, the public's fascination continued to grow. Media outlets, already obsessed with Nathan's profile and the Reiner legacy, now seized upon the idea of a hidden room full of secrets. Headlines speculated wildly. Hidden Hollywood secrets revealed. The Reiner family vault. Clues to a shocking murder? Social media exploded with theories, some logical, some fantastical, as audiences attempted to piece together the mystery themselves. The narrative had transformed from a simple story of a family tragedy into a sprawling psychological puzzle with intrigue, suspense, and potentially explosive revelations. Despite the sensational coverage, the investigators remained focused on the evidence. One particularly compelling item was a series of letters between Nathan and an unknown confidant. The letters were cryptic, discussing feelings of anger, isolation, and perceived betrayal. Some suggested Nathan was considering drastic measures, though the language was often metaphorical or ambiguous. Forensic analysts debated the meaning, wondering if these notes were artistic expressions, emotional venting, or actual premeditation. Every word became a piece of the puzzle, a clue that could either implicate or exonerate. As the investigation deepened, a disturbing pattern emerged regarding the timing of Nathan's actions. Logs from the house, security footage, and time-stamped messages created a timeline that investigators painstakingly reconstructed. Each segment revealed moments where Nathan's movements aligned with potential opportunities to commit the crime, yet there were also gaps, moments of uncertainty that left room for alternative explanations. Was there a calculated plan, or did events spiral in an unexpected, chaotic way? By the end of the day, investigators were exhausted, mentally and emotionally. The hidden room had provided unprecedented insight into the Reiner family's inner workings, but it also introduced new layers of complexity. The public, meanwhile, remained obsessed, hungry for updates, clues, and speculation. Analysts, psychologists, and commentators debated endlessly about the implications of the findings, about what they revealed regarding Nathan's mental state, the family dynamic, and the nature of the tragedy itself. And then came the discovery that would shock the team most of all: a small, unassuming envelope, tucked behind one of the cabinets, marked only with a date from years ago. Inside were documents that hinted at a plan, a confrontation, and perhaps even foreknowledge of conflict that no one outside the family had suspected. The implications were staggering. Could this suggest premeditation? Had Nathan been planning something far in advance? Or was there another layer of manipulation, another player, lurking in the shadows? The questions were impossible to ignore. What was in that envelope? How did it connect to Nathan? And what hidden truths about the Reiner family might finally be revealed? The answers, investigators knew, could change everything. But first, they would have to decipher the clues carefully, navigating the labyrinth of secrets, lies, and emotions that had been locked away behind that hidden door for years. And just when the team thought they were beginning to understand the scope of the secrets, a single revelation would shatter all assumptions. A revelation that no one saw coming, and one that would set the stage for the next shocking chapter in the Reiner saga. The envelope was small, almost innocuous, yellowed with age and tucked behind the back panel of the hidden cabinet. To the untrained eye, it could have been dismissed as an old document, forgotten and irrelevant. But investigators immediately recognized its potential significance. The envelope bore a single date, stamped in neat handwriting, months before the events that had shocked Los Angeles. March 14, 2019. Whoever had placed it there had intended for it to be found, but whether it was a warning, a confession, or a piece of a larger puzzle remained unknown. Inside were a series of letters, photographs, and notes, all meticulously organized. The handwriting on several of the letters matched Nathan's, but others were penned by someone else. An unidentified figure whose involvement raised more questions than it answered. The letters referenced disputes over inheritance, creative control, and emotional grievances that had been simmering for years. One passage, in particular, caught investigators' attention. "I cannot continue under these conditions. Something must change, or everything will collapse. I fear what I am capable of if ignored." The chilling ambiguity of the note sent a wave of tension through the investigative team. Was this an expression of frustration or a foreshadowing of violence? Did Nathan see these writings as a personal warning, or were they part of a carefully orchestrated plan? And who was the mysterious correspondent mentioned in other letters? A confidant, an accomplice, or merely an observer? The possibilities were endless, and every hypothesis seemed more disturbing than the last. Investigators began tracing the origins of each document, cross-referencing handwriting, ink types, and paper sources. It became clear that Nathan had been expressing discontent for years, sometimes in private diaries, sometimes through letters to trusted individuals. But these were not idle complaints. They contained strategic reflections, detailed observations about the household, and repeated mentions of control, opportunity, and escape. The language was intense, calculated, and, at times, terrifying. It suggested that whoever wrote the notes was thinking several steps ahead, meticulously planning for outcomes most would not even dare imagine. The photographs included in the envelope added another layer of intrigue. Some were innocuous family snapshots, but others captured moments that seemed staged or symbolic. One image showed a locked study door, slightly ajar, as if inviting someone to peek inside. Another showed a family gathering where Nathan appeared isolated, staring into the distance, disconnected from the celebration around him. Investigators and forensic psychologists pored over these images, analyzing posture, gaze, and context. Each photo was a potential clue, a frozen piece of a timeline that might reveal motive, intent, or emotional state. Public fascination grew as news of the envelope leaked, though the full details were initially withheld. Headlines speculated wildly. Hidden envelope reveals dark secrets of Reiner family. Letters point to pre-planned confrontation. Social media erupted with theories about what the documents contained, who wrote them, and whether they indicated guilt or simply despair. True crime forums buzzed with analysis, drawing comparisons to other high-profile family tragedies and dissecting every word that had been released. The public was hooked, eager to follow every twist and turn of the investigation. Meanwhile, forensic teams focused on the handwriting and materials themselves. Advanced techniques revealed subtle differences in pen pressure, ink saturation, and paper type, suggesting that multiple individuals had contributed to the contents. One team member noted that the letters had been intentionally preserved, almost as if someone had been creating a time capsule, a record to be discovered at the right moment. The thought sent shivers down the spines of investigators. Someone had been orchestrating this for years, leaving breadcrumbs that only now were being uncovered. The narrative surrounding Nathan became increasingly complex. While some letters clearly reflected his own voice, anger, resentment, and isolation, others hinted at influences from outside the family. There were subtle suggestions that he had been manipulated, guided, or pressured by someone he trusted, though whether that individual acted out of loyalty, fear, or malevolence remained unclear. Investigators now had to consider the possibility that the Reiner tragedy was not solely the result of Nathan's actions, but involved a network of hidden dynamics, loyalties, and secrets. Psychologists examining the letters emphasized their emotional volatility. Nathan's words fluctuated between rage, despair, and reflection, revealing a mind grappling with conflicting impulses. He expressed love and admiration for his parents alongside profound resentment and fear. Analysts noted that such emotional complexity could lead to unpredictable behavior, particularly under extreme stress. The letters were not just evidence. They were a window into a human psyche pushed to its breaking point. As the envelope's contents were cataloged, investigators noticed one peculiar detail, a recurring reference to a location within the mansion itself, a small, private room on the second floor, previously believed to be a storage area. Nathan had marked it repeatedly in different letters, describing it as a place of secrecy, reflection, and, cryptically, decisions. The implications were staggering. Could this room have been where Nathan planned critical moments of the crime? Was it a symbolic space for him, a mental anchor, or a literal staging ground? The discovery of the envelope also had ramifications for the legal case. Defense and prosecution teams alike realized that these documents could be used to construct a timeline of intent, motive, and mental state. The envelope was a double-edged sword. It could exonerate Nathan by framing the letters as emotional venting, or it could implicate him by demonstrating premeditation. Every word mattered, every line a potential pivot in a high-stakes courtroom drama that would captivate the world. Public interest intensified as more details emerged. Media outlets speculated on the identity of the mysterious correspondent, the timing of the letters, and whether they indicated collaboration or manipulation. Headlines became more sensational. Envelope could rewrite Reiner tragedy. Did hidden messages predict murder? Social media theories ranged from psychological breakdown to conspiracy, and amateur sleuths scoured available evidence, attempting to connect dots that even investigators were only beginning to understand. Yet even as the investigation unraveled layers of the mystery, new questions emerged. Who placed the envelope in the hidden room? How long had it been there, and why now? Was Nathan the sole author of its contents, or part of a larger scheme? And most pressing, what critical truth lay inside that could finally explain the events of that fateful Sunday? As Chapter 5 closes, the investigation reaches a pivotal point. The envelope, a seemingly simple artifact, had become the key to understanding the Reiner family tragedy. Its contents hinted at premeditation, emotional turmoil, and a hidden network of influence that no one had anticipated. Investigators realized that every prior assumption about Nathan, the family, and the events of that day needed to be reconsidered. And just as they began to piece together the implications, a final, shocking discovery within the envelope would upend the narrative yet again. A revelation so unexpected that it would force everyone involved to confront a truth far darker and more intricate than they had ever imagined. What was inside that final note? And how would it change the investigation? And Nathan's fate, forever? The answers were coming. And when they did, no one would be prepared. The envelope had already upended the investigation. Letters, photographs, and notes had given glimpses into Nathan's mind, the family dynamics, and hidden tensions within the Reiner household. But the last item, a single, folded piece of stationery, would send shockwaves through the investigative team. It was simple, almost unassuming, yet its contents suggested a truth that no one had anticipated, a revelation that could redefine the entire narrative of the tragedy. The note was handwritten in Nathan's own hand. The ink was faded slightly with age, but the words were legible, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. If this ever comes to light, it began, you must know the truth. I have loved my parents, but there are forces beyond family that cannot be ignored. The things I have endured, the pressures, the betrayals, some invisible, some deliberate, have shaped me in ways they could not understand. There is more than meets the eye. Beware the shadows that walk among us. The investigators exchanged uneasy glances. The note didn't confess to any crime, yet it carried the weight of forewarning. The language was cryptic, almost conspiratorial, suggesting that Nathan had knowledge of influences or events beyond the immediate family. Who were the forces he referenced? Were these metaphorical, psychological pressures? Or was there someone else involved, someone manipulating events from behind the scenes? The ambiguity left room for interpretation, and each potential meaning was more alarming than the last. Psychologists analyzing the note noted several critical aspects. The phrasing reflected extreme emotional complexity, a mixture of fear, loyalty, and defiance. Nathan's handwriting indicated both meticulous control and bursts of emotional intensity, suggesting a mind grappling with internal conflict. Experts highlighted the repeated use of words like truth, betrayal, and shadows, indicating that Nathan felt both victimized and burdened by knowledge that others did not possess. It was a mind teetering between rational planning and emotional volatility, and investigators knew that understanding it would be crucial to unraveling the entire case. The note also referenced locations within the mansion, some of which had already been identified in previous documents, and others that were previously overlooked. Nathan had underlined a phrase, "In the room where everything began, the answers lie." Investigators immediately theorized that he might have been referring to the hidden second-floor room discovered earlier. Could he have been leaving clues, or was this merely a reflection of his state of mind, a poetic way of expressing his frustrations and fears? Each possibility carried implications that investigators would have to consider carefully. Meanwhile, media coverage intensified. News outlets, alerted to the discovery of the final note, speculated endlessly about its meaning. Headlines ranged from the sensational, Nathan Reiner's cryptic note, forewarning or confession, to the analytical. Hidden messages in Reiner envelope suggest complex family dynamics. Social media platforms were flooded with amateur interpretations, psychological profiles, and conspiracy theories. Forums debated whether the shadows referred to a literal accomplice, metaphorical pressures, or even external influences such as financial advisors or industry rivals. The public was captivated, hungry for every nuance, every potential revelation. Investigators, however, could not afford speculation. They meticulously cross-referenced the note with all available evidence: phone records, security footage, past letters, and personal diaries. They traced the timeline of events, identifying moments that aligned with the letter's references. One striking observation emerged. Nathan had been alone in critical moments, yet some of his movements suggested awareness of forces beyond the immediate environment. Could he have been influenced, pressured, or manipulated by someone else? If so, who? And to what extent had this contributed to the tragedy? Forensic analysis revealed subtle, almost imperceptible marks on the note, faint fingerprints, a slight crease pattern, and traces of substances that suggested it had been handled and stored in a controlled manner. These details hinted at deliberate preservation, as though Nathan intended for the note to be discovered at a specific time. Investigators began to consider the possibility that he had been planning, consciously or unconsciously, a narrative to protect himself, to reveal a partial truth, or to send a warning. Each interpretation opened new questions, complicating an already labyrinthine investigation. The note's psychological impact on the investigative team was profound. The language, the timing, and the subtle clues suggested a level of foresight and awareness that few had anticipated. Nathan was not merely a reactive figure. He had been processing events, emotions, and pressures for years, anticipating consequences, and perhaps even attempting to influence outcomes indirectly. It was a portrait of a mind at once brilliant, tormented, and dangerous, a combination that left investigators wary, intrigued, and increasingly uncertain about how much they truly understood. As the team continued to analyze the note, they discovered connections to previous letters in the envelope. Certain phrases were repeated, ideas echoed, and references reinforced. This created a pattern that suggested coherence and intention. Nathan had not been randomly venting. He had been constructing a narrative, encoding his emotions and knowledge in ways that were cryptic yet purposeful. Each line of the note was a potential key to understanding his motivations, actions, and the broader context of the Reiner family tragedy. Public fascination reached a fever pitch when leaked reports suggested that the note referenced shadows, a term that sparked endless debate. Some theorized it was a literal accomplice. Others suggested it was symbolic of hidden pressures or family secrets. Every new interpretation fueled speculation, making the story a national obsession. Social media was ablaze with theories, timelines, and amateur psychological profiles, while professional analysts dissected each word, searching for meaning that could clarify Nathan's actions. But the most unsettling realization came when investigators cross-referenced the note with Nathan's digital communications. Certain phrases, metaphors, and references appeared repeatedly across emails, text messages, and private social media posts. The pattern was undeniable. Nathan had been consistent in his language, consistent in his references, and consistent in hinting at forces, conflicts, and pressures that extended beyond the immediate family. This suggested a long-standing awareness of tension, manipulation, and perhaps external influence, a revelation that transformed the investigation from a story of familial violence into a far more complex psychological and sociological puzzle. By the end of Chapter 6, investigators faced a chilling truth. The final note was more than a cryptic warning or emotional outburst. It was a carefully constructed piece of evidence, a deliberate attempt to convey knowledge, frustration, and perhaps guilt without revealing the full extent of Nathan's actions. It suggested a narrative far more intricate than anyone had anticipated, one that intertwined family secrets, psychological complexity, and potential external influences. And then came the final shock. A marginal annotation on the back of the note, written in a different hand, a hand previously unidentified. The annotation read simply, He cannot be trusted alone. Watch. The implication was staggering. Had someone else been aware of Nathan's intentions? Had they tried to intervene or manipulate him? And if so, who? The revelation opened a door to an entirely new dimension of the investigation, one that promised to unravel secrets even deeper than those already discovered. The questions were immediate and urgent. Who wrote the annotation? What did they know? And how would this hidden warning alter the understanding of Nathan, his motives, and the tragedy that had befallen the Reiner family? The answers were coming, but when they did, no one would be prepared for the scope, the complexity, and the darkness that lay behind the Reiner legacy. The marginal note on the back of Nathan's final letter, "He cannot be trusted alone. Watch," sent shockwaves through the investigative team. For weeks, the case had focused primarily on Nathan, his motives, his history, his psychological state. But this annotation hinted at an entirely new layer. Someone else, someone aware of Nathan's mental and emotional turbulence, had been observing him, perhaps even guiding him, perhaps even controlling events from the shadows. For detectives, this revelation changed everything. Suddenly, the case was no longer simply a tragic family murder committed by a son in a moment of emotional breakdown. It became a labyrinthine puzzle with multiple actors, hidden alliances, and long-buried secrets. Who had written the annotation? Was it a concerned friend, a family confidant, or someone with darker intentions, using Nathan as a pawn to achieve goals hidden from everyone else? To trace the origins of the annotation, forensic handwriting experts were brought in. They analyzed ink type, pressure, letter formation, and age. At first, results were inconclusive. The handwriting did not match any family member known to investigators.